final Doug Wilson and Friends of this No Quarter November. This is Doug Wilson.
Hi.
And here are some friends. I'm Joe Rigney, Jared Longshore, and joining us today, the one and only Ben Merkle.
I'm the last friend.
The last friend. The very last one. We drug him in.
Barely made it.
Barely
Friend
made it.
at the end of the world.
That's right. And we're excited. It's been a great November. We've had a big time. You said it earlier. You thought, man, this has been one of the best ones. This one's been the best.
Yeah, this has been the best because the other team came out to play.
That's good.
So in previous Novembers, we've been interacting with the zeitgeist, which is sort of like being in a fist fight with the fog.
Yeah.
Right. You're dealing with all the crazy stuff you heard about this previous year and the general vibe and that sort of thing. But this November, we had at least 3 episodes where other people came on the field and made it what it was.
What it was.
We're so grateful.
We're so grateful.
There was your exchange with Karen Swallow Pryor and the empathy thing.
Yep.
That was one November-y thing.
Yep.
And then there was the spanking video.
Yeah. Nancy coming off the top rope.
Nancy put us all in the shade. And then there was the Kevin DeYoung piece that just hit at the tail end to sort of finish off the month.
Yeah, that's actually a good place to start. Let's talk a little bit about the DeYoung piece. I think first thing to say is it was good because it was an attempt to be clear, fair, and to get at some really important issues.
Yeah, he just as someone who studies rhetoric and writing and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
most of our enemies are unhinged.
Right.
So when they come against us, they think that if one's good, two's better. Mm-hmm. If there's one orc in Moscow, let's make there be 3 orcs in Moscow, and everybody's an orc, everybody's a Klingon.
Yeah,
they're all demented, and the people who have any acquaintance with what's going on here know that that's not true, and so they dismiss it. But then they say, "But why all the vehemence?" And then they give us a second look. So the people who are unhinged critics are people whose criticisms do nothing, I think, long run, but help us.
Right.
Kevin DeYoung made the very shrewd decision. I think it was a conscientious one, but he didn't demonize us.
Right.
There were a number of things that he said. This is what they do well. This is good. This is good.
Yeah.
I understand how reasonable Christians would be attracted to that.
Right.
But I think there's a fly in the ointment.
Right.
I think there's a problem. And his criticism was a weighty criticism.
Right.
But he didn't make the mistake of trying to demonize us and make it appear what everybody knew was not true as the truth.
Yeah. So at this point, I think you're planning to respond on Monday. I've got one cooking, and then you've got one cooking. So we won't go into all of that because why would we spoil the December surprises?
That's right. No spoilers.
No spoilers. But we could give a little teaser, maybe. So you want to tell us what you're gonna what kind of angle you?
Oh, I'd love to. First of all, I think this is a great moment because one, I just think Kevin's great. So I bumped into him at a conference before. And he's written all kinds of stuff that's just really good. So I just think, like when I think Kevin DeYoung, I always think this is a great fella. And I'm glad that he critiqued the way he did because I do think it's a chance to counter it as brothers and say, okay, this is great because you have now represented a big problem that I think is on the other side. And so we need to explain some things on this side, but try to explain what's going on over there. Primarily, to your point, when you read Kevin, I find that he writes ways I at least attempt to write, where I'm like, you want to grant everything that's good, and that's being careful. But the problem is, in doing so, sometimes you can paint yourself into a corner because you can't say, well, Doug is presenting to the church and the world a muscular, angular Christianity that commending you, and his family loves him and loves Christ.
Yeah,
but I'm concerned about the long-term spiritual side effects.
He's built an ecosystem
of trying to admire the mood he cultivates. I'm like, it doesn't comport because grapes don't come from bramble bushes. So in him being careful, I basically think he kind of reduced his own criticisms to a point where, like, what are you talking about? Like, are you saying that this mood is actually going? if this mood comes from such virtue, how can you be worried that it's actually going to cultivate something other than that Christian virtue?
Yeah, or and at the very least, there's an element of like, whatever difference or disagreements there may be, does it warrant the kind of standoffishness and stiff arm that Moscow often receives from the world that Kevin lives in?
Yeah, and there's a few more things. I won't go to just one more teaser, one more part in that. People don't understand Moscow because they're not actually at this intersection between the church and the world that is so clear, and then they also don't understand like the Chestertonian Calvinism. People don't get that I made a meme and I put a flamethrower and one pill of the Matrix meme, and I put piety, and of course Morpheus goes, "Did you just take both pills?" Did you take I want to poke that because I'm like, I know that world. I was in this world for a long time. It was always like, you can't, and then they have this weird infatuation with Moscow, but you can't do the flamethrower. You can't write like Wodehouse and be spiritual. Right? DeYoung said, I love Wodehouse too, but as ministers, it's like, you can't be a minister and write like Wodehouse. Right. And I want to hit that and say, no, that's actually the kind of spirit you actually need to be a godly man in this age. Now, I don't mean, let me say this in the mic clearly, I don't think people have to write like Doug or Colt. You don't have to use the words Doug uses. I'm like, not everybody's got that spiritual gift. Not everybody has this ability. So I'm not saying you have to do it like Moscow. I'm just saying you really shouldn't be that upset about some kind of lack of virtue here. That's just, he just missed it on that point.
So for mine, I got a couple of things that I'm wanting to hit on. One is the role of satire, because I think among friends of mine, I think one of the things that they feel is the Canon Twitter account, when it makes fun of things and makes fun especially of like fellow Christians, like real Christians, the mistake they make is thinking, if the justification for satire is Elijah and the prophets of Baal or Jesus and the Pharisees, well, that's what he's doing against high-handed rebellion, wickedness, and to unbelievers. And so if you're making fun of us, if you're making a meme like that, if you're doing something like that, are you treating us like unbelievers? And so part of it is just getting clear on the fact that satire is a form of rebuke, and it's on a dimmer switch. And so there's certain kinds, right? But for whatever reason, that's not an obvious thing to a lot of people, is that they think if you're using satire, you're treating us like a non-Christian, and it's not
like excommunication.
It's like excommunication. It's a why this is something that you use on the world, but not something you should use on fellow brothers. And that's just not true. So if you think of satire as a form of rebuke, it's on a dimmer switch. So playful prodding and poking can be seriously done because, hey, knock it off. You're kind of heading down the wrong path, or you're making a stupid point, or you're acting like a fool. That's perfectly appropriate to use satire and that kind of mockery. And then you just dial it up as it's more serious compromise, more serious failures of leadership among Christians. Well, now you're going to dial it up, and then you get to the really gnarly stuff, and then you've got some really choice words that now you're into Elijah and the prophets of Baal territory. But it's different. So that's one. I think the other big thing is the notion that Moscow's the one that wants to stiff arm everybody, that one doesn't want to link arms with people. And I just think I've been working for 15 years to try to build bridges among all of my friends all over the place. Like I want everybody to be friends, right? But let's be friends with everybody who's friendly, and especially with other Christians who have same, theological convictions, conservative, Bible believing, Reformed. We ought to be able to get along while still being the different flavors that we are. And in all of my experience, the barrier to linking arms has never been on the Moscow side, and has almost always been among those who want to be respectable and for whom association or affiliation with Moscow would be a problem because of reputation, because of credibility. They don't want to encourage it, and so they want to keep their distance. And so for Kevin to sort of chastise Moscow for playfully making memes and therefore burning bridges or forbidding Christian fellowship, all the while all of the invitations to come out here have been denied or rescinded or backed out of, and nobody will come on the show. Nobody will, we're getting no's every which way, is a little disingenuous because it paints them as, we would love to be friends, but do you? Would the effort to link arms actually be? So that's a little preview. There's more in there, but what are you going to do?
Okay, so what am I going to do? That's a good question. So I'll just say, overall, I've got a head full of bees, you know. So I've got to chase this and chase this and chase this. But I start off by making the point I've just made here earlier, what Kevin did right. You know, and I want to commend him for what he did right, because it was real criticism as opposed to just an unhinged rant. It was I knew what his objection was. He articulated it clearly, and I can answer it. So I would want to commend him for that. So what Kevin did right. And then I've got a bunch of different things that I want to address. The language thing, the differentiation thing is something else I want to address. But I'll just mention here what I'm going to conclude with, what the conclusion with. At the very top of Kevin's article, he says, I'm not really interested in getting into a big debate with Wilson or his supporters. And I'm sorry, you can't do that, right? This I think the header for that concluding section is a mandatory Q&A.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, Kevin DeYoung has just conducted a drive-by admonition or a drive-by rebuke and sprayed everybody, you know, sprayed everybody, and then says, and I'm not interested in, I think the discussion is closed. No.
Yeah.
No,
right.
It's not closed. And I think, and there's something that's different about this. We've been fielding questions about tone for 40 years. This is not a new objection. But there was something very different about this go-round. And that was when this article came out and when Justin Taylor retweeted it and made some comments about it. I saw by a significant, there was a significant increase of widespread support for us. People saying that this criticism doesn't fly. In other words, I think this was a swing and a miss that before we've even answered, a bunch of other people out there have seen that it was a swing and a miss. And you can even see the disgruntled behavior of some people who would like it to have connected, who are complaining that it was a swing and a miss. And so that tells me that this is not over. I'm very grateful that someone of Kevin DeYoung's stature put this ball into play. But having put it into play, the ball is in play and the game's not over. So let's
keep having the conversation.
We're going to have this conversation. And I think given the fact that it was not a knockout blow that Kevin delivered, I think he's going to have to follow it up, or someone in his corner is going to have to follow it up.
Right. That's good. Well, you can look forward to that. We'll have some of those later in the week. They'll be in December, so there'll probably be qualifications and all sorts, all nuance coming out every which way.
I deliberately pushed my response into December so that I could qualify the heck out of it.
There you go. Maybe shift gears to this. I think one of the heart of that accusation was you guys fight all you do is fight. You're just fighting all the time. You're pugnacious, and you seem to really like it. But Kevin does acknowledge, sort of in passing, that we also like to build. So, build and fight is one of our key things. The bookstore down there, the NSA's bookstore, is called Sword and Shovel. Right, Ezra and Nehemiah, the Nehemiah deal, rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. But I think one of the misconceptions is that people think, well, in Moscow itself, Moscow's kind of a safe place because it's in a red state. And so there's probably Christians it's a small town, and so Christ Church is in charge of everything. All the people at Christ Church run everything, and so it's just a safe Christian place. Right. I think this is probably the most common misconception about here, and so I'm wondering maybe you guys talk a little bit about that and about how some of our pugnaciousness, some of the fight is because we're living. There's a place here where the battle lines are really clear, and you don't get to just kind of push it into the future. Any thoughts on just kind of how Moscow itself as a town, this particular makeup, has sort of shaped the kind of community that had to be built here in order to weather the particulars?
I think the president of NSA, who sits on Friendship Square, and who sees a lot of you've put up with probably more nonsense than. Anybody.
It is really remarkable. Definitely, Moscow is not in the back pocket of Christ Church by any means. Right. Particularly politically, you see this, that it's a very strong left-leaning city council, mayor, local government, and that shows in the there's high tolerance for a lot of shenanigans conducted against us, and not a lot of interest in actually backing up our rights as citizens and whatnot. So yeah, the number of times, how many times, if you just watch the security footage for Christchurch or New St. Andrews, how many times on any given weekend are the front windows spat on, or who knows what? Yep. We've had the windows broken out, tires slashed. But then also just the political apparatus, just strange charges that you're constantly having to defend yourself, complaints and zoning, all sorts of things like that are a little bit ridiculous. So we're definitely in a constant sort of defensive position. And I think that does create a little bit of, I was just talking with one of our employees who's newer to the school, and he was just talking about like the last 6 weeks or so on social media had kind of melted his eyebrows for all the things that are going on. And he was looking at me, and I was like, this is just Tuesday in Moscow, man. Like there is a certain kind of, you learn to deal with a certain kind of constant hostility against you, and you kind of get bigger than it, and it doesn't scare you or bother you because this is the town that you live in.
And something to point out here is that in one respect, some people say, oh, they started Logos School and they started building institutions decades ago, and that's true. So by the grace of God, we compared to a lot of Christian communities, we have a jump on it in terms of building institutions, publishing house and multiple publishing houses, and K through 12 Logos School and college and all of that. But it's also, so we're maybe 15, 20 years down the road ahead of other Christian communities, again, by the grace of God. But the unbelieving opposition is also 15, 20 years down the road. So I think what we're seeing here is in microcosm and a flash forward of what's starting to bubble up in the rest of the country.
Right.
And so, and one of the reasons, I think a lot of Christians instinctively understand that, and so they're looking to us because we're in the third quarter and they're in the first quarter, and they're thinking, how do you play this? How should we play this offense? Yep. And I think that there are some helpful things that we could offer as a result of that.
Learned a thing or two over those years.
But it's not because everything's placid here.
Right.
I think that if you look at the last 2 to 3 decades in American kind of cultural history, and particularly the role of the evangelical church in America over the last 2 to 3 decades, almost all of it is marked by the loss of institutions. We're losing colleges, losing churches, losing denominations. Just kind of, it's losses across the board, and there's one significant counter to that, which has been, I think, the advance of the classical Christian education movement. That is the single biggest gain that the evangelical church has had in America over the last 20 to 30 years, and it's remarkable how every time I go to a college, a room of college presidents who are introducing themselves and saying something about their college, every single college is trying to position itself as where classical Christian education is really happening. It's the one place where we're gaining ground, and that started here. And so when I hear critiques that you're all about the snark, or you're all about just critiques, and when I look at what's going on in Moscow, I see, there is a certain spiciness in certain places, but 98% of the work is the work of building schools, institutions, building homes, building churches, building Christian community. When I, as a recruiter, when I'm trying to convince somebody to come to New St. Andrews, by far the one thing I'm always trying to do is just say, just come and visit. I just want you to come and spend a weekend in the community, have a Sabbath dinner, go to a psalm sing, learn and see what's going on. And that the idea that all that's happening is snark is hilarious. To anybody that's here. But I do think that there is a spicy disposition that is required to actually advance. And you don't gain ground unless you're ready to actually own it in a way that does offend certain sensibilities. And until the church adopts that, I think it's going to only be losses.
Yeah. So imagine talking to your great-grandfather who landed at Normandy in D-Day. And you said, Gramps, what do you think of France? And he said, well, it was a beautiful countryside. I was there for 4 years, but it's a violent country.
Right. Yeah, right.
It's just,
Yeah.
I've never seen so much violence. Well, you were in a war, and so
on the front line.
On the front lines, and you fought all the way to Berlin. And if he dismissed France as a violent place, well, one sees his perspective, of course.
Yeah.
But that's not. You zoom out for a minute.
Right.
So if you were to come here and spend a few weeks, the chances are good that you would be able to go to a play, a football game, a concert, all kinds.
A couple of Sabbath dinners.
Worship services, a bunch of things that have nothing whatever to do
with satire.
With satire.
But do have to do with attempts to apply the gospel to all of life.
Right.
And you're going to see that everywhere. How does the gospel change this? How can I be obedient here?
But here's the thing. If we were having concerts and plays and cultural engagement and all of those things, and we didn't have the combative spirit, we didn't have guards on the walls,
right.
We didn't have armed sentries. If we didn't have that, what we'd be doing is building nice institutions for the liberals to take over,
right?
Because that's what they do, right? Liberalism, moderatism is parasitic,
right?
Believers build institutions, and liberals take them over,
right?
And
which is the opposite of Deuteronomy says you're gonna, plow in fields that you didn't plant. You're gonna, harvest from vineyards that you didn't.
Right.
So you're going to live in houses you didn't build. That's the Deuteronomic promises are all they're going to build something and you'll inherit it by the grace of God, by the blessing of God if you're faithful. Right. And instead, we're the one building the houses to hand it off to the
right.
In just a bit of a sticky situation that we're in now, I imagine that somebody that really appreciated DeYoung's article would say, oh, yeah, that's all fine and good, but there's a lot of men out there that are just copying your snark and they're not building anything. And I would grant it. Say, well, amen. That's true. And for that group, for those people who say, well, I'm going to take it to the libs, and you're not actually cultivating your home, you're not actually developing a theology of worship as a minister of the gospel, you're not working with committees and fundraising and all kinds of work with classical Christian schools and colleges. Those people actually have to start building. So you have to look around you in your local area, and you have to get to work. Like if you're not actually longing for the kingdom and laboring to see the kingdom manifest in your midst, and you're just taking it to the libs on Twitter, then you're missing it. So I would want to grant the point, and then I'd want to point out the other problem. So the other group, many of the people, especially the institutional-minded people that liked DeYoung's article, the problem is those institutions already exist, and they're big, and they don't have this fundamental principle that is necessary to not drift left.
Right.
All right. So I remember Moeller. Moeller was the guy that said institutions drift left and they have to be ramrodded to the right. And if I back up in my SBC days, that they recovered the board at Southern Seminary, and the entire board was conservative, and they said, go get them, Al. They hired a president and said, go get them. But when you're the president of an organization and your whole board's to your right saying, go get them. Well, you're the president of an organization. Oh, let's party. Yeah. Okay. But what do you do when the board's to the left of you?
Or mixed.
It's mixed, and it's just drifting, and it's drifting, and it's drifting. And I want to say to all of these institutions, first of all, TGC is gone. Okay. ERLC, gone. But all of these big institutions, the ones that want to throw shade at us and try to get people to come to their side, how far are you going to let it drift before you ramrod it to the right? That's my question for these men.
How effective was Kevin DeYoung's winsomeness at keeping TGC from becoming a Taylor Swift fan?
Yeah, right.
I mean, and this is where, if I look around, Reformed evangelicalism, American evangelicalism, there are all these institutions. They're far too big. So it's one thing for an individual to go, you know what, I got to change. And I'm not saying the right hand of the Lord is too short for this. I'm just saying it's time. Like, we're going to keep it up. You're going to get it double time from us until these institutions that have conservative people at the top that are unwilling to pay the cost and they're not humble enough to get a flamethrower. Get mad at me for that. Like, people are going to get mad. Whatever. You're not humble enough to do some of the things that are required. Like the prophets had to do some things, right? Like, I mean, this was, but you're not. You're way too clean. All right. And anyways, they're going to have to ramrod now. These institutions are just gone.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things I remember at some point, you know, the NSA Build and Fight video. It's kind of the anthem video is a really good embodiment of, I think, the Moscow mood. And so if you haven't seen that, go look up the NSA Build and Fight video, because it is about this. We're building the wall, rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, and we're doing it with hostiles harassing us in various ways. Like you said, one of the things here is you can see how the wider there's a cultural element to this. So there's just something in the air among the adversaries of God, and how they leverage that, and then they figure out how they can wield political power and various other kinds of economic power in order to disrupt things. But I remember one time showing a couple of NSA promo videos to a pastor friend of mine, and just to get his take. Like, what do you think? Because I like them. I think they've been great, and motivating and energizing. And I just said, what do you think of this? And his response was really simple. He just said, there are certain problems that institution will never have.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really, I mean, in other words, the thing is, there's a, why did something like the woke infection get so far into so many different places? It was respectable. It was respectability. It was led, and it was soft and subtle, and there was some truth in certain things. Oh yeah, but there's a racial history. There is, you know, abuses happen. So it's all respectable, and we want to be respectable. We want to be known for caring for all of these things. And so it's able to work its way all the way in, playing on soft-hearted Christians and leaders who aren't willing to draw a line. Well, that sort of infection just sailed past Moscow. Like, you guys didn't have to deal with any internally. There wasn't any constituency within this community that was agitating for all of the stuff that afflicted hundreds and hundreds of churches and ministries and denominations around the country. Well, why not? It's like,
couldn't we just call the women pastors shepherdesses?
Right. Yeah. Right. I mean, why not? Well, because of flamethrowers, right? Like that it's a disinfectant that clears stuff out, so that you don't even have to deal with certain kinds of ideological rot.
Yeah. When you have a statement of faith or institutional distinctives or things like that, you say, this is what we are about. Every time you hire or enroll a student or something like that, there's always a portion that is sitting there thinking, yeah, I'm not. I'll kind of nod at that. I'll sign my name, but I'm really here because sooner or later you're going to die, and I'm going to steer this in a different direction. I'm really about something else, and I can tolerate what you've put up, but I really plan on taking this in a different direction. That's always a force in every institution. And so if your subscription to your statement of faith or your institutional distinctives is just a nod and a wink, then you can be guaranteed that the people that are coming behind you are going to overthrow it.
Right.
If your institutional distinctives are portrayed in such a way that to come here, I need to really actually own that.
Right.
Then you push that whole crowd out. And so there's a whole host of, you're right, there's a whole host of questions that I kind of don't need to ask when I'm interviewing, because if you're willing to come to Moscow,
right.
And this is the sad thing is that, like, you know, if you're willing to teach at New St. Andrews, your CV is kind of destroyed for all other future
for
institutional.
A lot of other places.
So you have to mean it. And when you have that, then there's this camaraderie, there's a like-mindedness. We truly believe what we're saying. And I think there's a lot of these other institutions that are saying, no, we believe that also. It's in our statement of faith, but it's not in the hearts of half of your employees. It's not in the hearts of the next generation.
In their hearts, and it's got to be in the water, and it's got to be in the air. So that
it has to be a mood, doesn't it?
It has to be a mood. That's a good. So if someone accepts a job at NSA, and let's say they're kind of moderate, they could drift left under different circumstances, and that person, if they accepted a job here, gets in serious trouble with his extended family for coming here and has to answer questions.
Yeah.
Okay, he's not going to do it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because he won't. I mean, another way to put it is, when I was at Bethlehem, we had an episode. We had some soft woke elements that had worked their way in, and it was a big deal. It blew up, and it was really painful and really hard for a lot of people. And in reflecting back on it, it was interesting that during all of the time when the racial conversation was going on, or the abuse conversation, or the manhood womanhood conversation, and these things are happening as sort of institutions are waking up to wokeness. There were all these discussions about, hey, let's try to get a statement of faith. Let's try to get a statement. Let's put out some statements on this. Let's get some, affirmations, denials, and everything, which is good. Like those are good statements. Let's get clarity on these issues, and try to see if that can help clear out some stuff and put up good guardrails. And that's a good way. It ought to be done. But the thing that was most effective at bringing the issues to light and bringing them into sharp relief and eventually clearing them out was me appearing on Man Rampant with you.
Yeah.
Right. It was far more effective.
You're welcome.
Yeah, right. It was far more effective at sort of bringing the issues into sharp relief, because all of the people who were wanting to take the institutions and the churches in these different directions just lit their they lit their hair on fire. It went unhinged over this very reasonable discussion of different attitudes towards suffering and empathy, and because it was I didn't have to use any sharp language. I didn't have to do any of that. I just had to stand close enough.
Neither did I.
Right, yeah. In that instance, you just had to be a sweet little ball lamb, right? I was just asking questions. But it actually brought those issues out to where they could be addressed biblically. They could be, okay, well, that's really what you think. Let's do a Bible. Let's get into the Bible. What is our theological doctrine? But it took that to actually bring it out, because, like you said, there are people who can sort of, I can check that box, but are willing, but as soon as you're not looking, are going to try to carry the banner in a different direction. So here's a question. The other piece about the build piece is here's a story. It's a Kevin DeYoung story, because last spring he came to the Bethlehem Pastors Conference, and he and John Piper and I were sitting around talking. And he brought up, I think it was right after Tim Keller died. When did Keller die? Was that in the spring?
That sounds about right.
It may have been around there. So we were talking about Keller, and the comment Kevin made, observation he made was, if you think he was doing the Niebuhr's taxonomy of Christ and culture thing, and so there's the Christ transforming culture view.
Was this behind his article? His template?
It may have been related to that template, but it was a little separate from it. It was just who are the Christian transformationalists, and the observation he made was that if you look at modern evangelicals that are sort of Kuyperian and want to do the transformational thing, the two most prominent evangelical representatives of that view, Christ transforms culture, not separates, not whatever, are Doug Wilson and Tim Keller. Right? And he said, and so he made this observation. He said, and yet they're obviously so different. They're obviously different in all kinds of ways. And his question was, what accounts for it? And so I took a stab at it. And the thing, the first thing I said, well, there is something to the fact that big city, small town. There's something there that's going to bring out different things. Moscow's small. It's not necessarily less liberal. I've seen more. Ironic, it's just crazy. I've seen more trans people here in 4 months than I saw in Minneapolis in 10 years. Yeah. I mean, it's something just that, and that's part of the small town, right? They're they're at Walmart. It's all over the place. It's
the same guy with 3 dresses.
Oh, all right. I'll have to tell Susan. So it's part of a small town, big city. But the other thing is I think that when Keller would talk culture transformation, the first place the thing that would be front and center for cultural transformation would be things like the arts, would be things like vocation and business and big business finance. It's New York, and the sort of things that young up and coming New York single people are really excited about. When Moscow talks about Christ transforming culture, the first place we're talking about is your dinner table,
right?
Your home. It starts there, and that accounts in a lot of ways for a big difference in that mood. Is when we say culture, we're talking about culture in the home. We're talking about culture of a family, and then working out from there to a church and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And if I might add, the first place the center of it all is worship.
Right.
And that throws people for a loop that only see Moscow from the outside. Like they haven't worked through some of the worship theology that has been established here. And that is an essential piece. And it actually protects, this is the piety and the flamethrower thing. Okay. Doug, we have prayer meeting every Friday morning. Doug's liturgical prayer right at the end, right? Every week. But God, please, everything that we do, connect it as we show up to the Lord's Day with our families to worship you. Yes, this is the driving force of everything that we're doing. And we really believe that. So when the saints come together, Hebrews 12 thing, we believe we are coming together to the heavenly Jerusalem, and we are crying out to God, and we're expecting him to show up like he did on Mount Carmel. We're expecting him to show up and light the flame and change people's hearts through the Lord's Supper, through the word preached, through his sacrament, through his word. And that's deeply ingrained into the culture of this community, and it's foreign to the world outside, even the culture shapers outside. And so you don't start with the city, you start with your heart before the Lord, and you start with the Lord. And the whole thing is then by faith. So it's like we're trusting him in that moment, and then we're going everywhere else, trusting him to watch giants fall, to watch transformation in the covenant people, to watch people brought in. I mean, the whole thing is centered right there on worship, which... resources, that should be a freebie if Canon hasn't given it away. It should be like Angels in the Architecture and other work like that.
Oh, as it turns out, the Kindle freebie this week is Angels in the Architecture.
Well, look at that. I really didn't know that.
The original Moscow movie.
Yeah,
Little
the
product
original
placement.
Moscow Mood. The back in the day Moscow Mood was Angels in the Architecture, which really does get into that relation between worship and culture.
Yeah, and pastors do the same thing. Like, write the blog, and I think pastors need to be more in the public square. But make sure that you have developed your liturgy. Make sure you developed your sermons. Make sure you prayed over them. Make sure you developed your exhortations, your communion meditations. Like, that's your center.
Right.
And then get to these other things, but remember where your center is.
I think the other thing is the world will happily invite Christians to come in and engage them and partake with culture on any number of fronts when they know that the end result is that they will get your children. That you coming in means you're going to come in, but sooner or later we're going to get your kids. Right. And when you have, I think the thing that is really different is when you have a culture where the kids are actually following in the footsteps of the parents, where the focus is on raising that next generation to love God, where the authority of the pastor comes from the fact that he's qualified because he's raising an actual biblical family, which, Titus 1, 1 Timothy 3, qualifications for an elder, raising children that are believers. I think when you are coming at them with a culture that actually is replicating itself and growing, that's when you're going to actually get real conflict. Right. Because they'll let you put your Jesus sticker on anything when they know we're going to still get your kids. Right. We just have to wait a little bit.
Yep. So right now, I don't have the exact number, but it's roughly 35% of the kids at Logos. There's 650 kids at Logos. 35% of them are children of alums. Mm-hmm. Kids who went through Logos, got married, having kids, and their kids are now there. And then we're probably around the same percentage, 35% of all the school-aged kids in Moscow are in private Christian education. And so consequently, in our community here, the Christians have largely checked out of our voluntary program of being the breeders for the secularists, mm-hmm. where we're willing to have the babies, mm-hmm. and then we hand them over to the state to educate. Mm-hmm. Well, that was a fool's game.
And if you don't, then DeYoung's article was the long-term spiritual effects was sort of the warning he wanted to raise. Well, the long-term spiritual effects of that sort of thing, we're trusting the Lord that the long-term spiritual effects of that kind of intentionality and building and fighting is going to be the blessing of God for generations.
Right.
Make it practical, connect it to two things, November-ish. Number one was in terms of like that family cult. So if we're going to start, worship is the heartbeat. Worship is the place. That's if we want to talk about where the culture war begins, it's on the Lord's Day with God's people. But it does get out into the family. And one of the things you did, I think, in your Thanksgiving leftover No Quarter November, is you took a shot at parents and giving their kids smartphones, teenagers. And so I've got a 14-year-old. I've got a budding teenager. You've got a couple teenagers that are right there at the cusp. But you guys have raised teenagers, and
I did it before smartphones were invented.
Yeah, you did it before.
So
That's cheating.
I'm in a position of spiritual superiority.
Yeah, that's right. You did.
We did they not 1 minute.
But you had to do it with right in the middle of the smartphone sort of revolution. So I'm curious because I do think that when I look around at key challenges for maintaining the kind of culture you want to maintain, it seems to me that these little devices are one of the big. It's like the big Bronco that you have to wrestle. It's a small thing, but that's like the tongue. It's a fire. It gets set on. The world can get set on fire by this, both because of the gross evil that could come through it. You got a brothel in your pocket,
right,
and you're just going to give it to your kid. But also just because of the nonsense and triviality and other kinds of just wasting away of time that can come from these. So I'm just wondering, maybe just talk a little bit about how do we help? What advice you give to parents who really want to do the kind of building we're doing, but maybe undermining it by a too easy, breezy acquiescence when it comes to their kids and technology?
I would quick divide it into two categories. One would be the moral component. You want accountability, conversations that are meaningful, not just a cursory check, are you doing okay, but actual conversations on the moral side. But then you want to be concerned about the time waster side, just frittering away hours and hours scrolling through cat videos or whatever. So this was not. We didn't have any kind of smartphone or digital high technology when our kids were going through this period. But there were the equivalent at the time. Music videos, MTV just started up, and I think parents are ill-advised to just simply clamp down and run away. And they're also ill-advised to just hand the keys over to the kids and say, sort it out yourself. Mm-hmm. So parents have to learn how to operate a phone. They have to learn how to manage content, set filters, have conversations, cultivate the relationship with their kids, and not just say, oh, it's okay. You should check your kid's Spotify playlist, and if there's 15 explicit labels, and okay, so there's a problem. Or if half the songs say radio cleaned up version, that tells you that they took the dirty words out.
Yeah.
But there is probably a whole lot of gunk that's surrounded. So basically, I would urge active, engaged parents.
I think we had a number of rules with our kids. Like we let them have them at a certain age. I mean, not
about when do you think?
I want to
25.
That's the problem. Like once your kids graduate high school, I have this depth perception problem. Like I can't remember now. Did they start walking at 3 or 5? I can't.
Yeah, right.
But I remember it was basically for us. It was mostly like
upper high school.
No, it was lower than that. It was when they started getting into sports or junior high sports, because they would be going on these trips and we wanted to be able to communicate with them.
Right.
So we would do that. But the rules we would have would be things like we would not allow them to have internet upstairs. You're not on your phone upstairs, because upstairs
isolation.
That's where their bedrooms were. So that meant that anytime they're on their phone, they're in the living room out in front of us.
Yep.
I had standard deal was I pay for your phone. That means I can look at it whenever I want. And I think and they should be comfortable with that I can look and see, I can read what you've been doing, I can see what you've downloaded, and we can talk about what's on there. Because I'm walking you through how you ought to use this, and there's nothing hidden on this that's hidden from me. I know this was more of an issue with daughters than with sons. My sons had zero interest in social media. My daughters are more interested in that. So we are pretty reluctant to grant social media accounts. And when they did, they didn't post anything unless they previewed it with my wife and I first. So walking through, how are you going to present yourself? Why do you want to say it like that? Are you going to comment? Let's talk through what you're trying to do with that. and trying to teach them instincts about how they want to present themselves. And then also, I think like that Spotify thing, it was pretty common. Dinner table, we're talking about what's your Spotify, what's your Spotify list? Let's listen to the lyrics. Let's talk about that as a family. There shouldn't be a place where there's a me that's not engaged with the rest of my family. It's not a private little quiet thing. All of it is stuff that you need to talk to us about, and we can give you advice on. And then the goal is that then when they're 18, 19, to be able to say, okay, you've learned how to use this right. And it would be rough to hand an 18-year-old that device and say, you have complete freedom, and I've not prepared you to use this at all.
Right. I think you and I were talking because I was asking you this question about, okay, my son's getting 14, he wants to listen to things, and I don't. The one temptation of parents is to want to just run away from it all and just clamp down, and you don't get to any of that kid, and then you run into at some point they're going to get it. And I think one of the things you said, and maybe this was from Nate, was why don't you go? You're free to go roam and find whatever songs you want. So by the time they're 14, 15, you can go find stuff, but you got to bring it back and make yourself a playlist and show it to me, and let's look through the songs and let's talk about it. Right. And again, they need to be the sort of songs that you could play, on the speaker out loud, not just the songs that you want to have on your, earphones where nobody else could hear it.
Bring grandma over.
Yeah, bring grandma over.
Over on the couch.
How is she going to do? And I thought it was really helpful to just kind of go, okay, that's a way. It does require a certain amount of faith to say, okay, I'm letting them go search around on Spotify or Amazon Music or whatever it is to go find things, and they might bring back some stinkers. They might bring back some stuff that you're like, oh man. But what I found, this is just a couple weeks ago that you and I were talking about this. One of my sons came back and he said, well, Dad, this song, I really like this song, but it has the S word in it. Right. So what do I do? And so now we got to have that conversation about like, okay, is there a cleaner version? Is it something, and the conversation becomes, well, the problem with that sort of song is it's just going to get in your head and you're going to sing it without even thinking about it. And this is just going to become part of your normal vocabulary. And even though there is a place for carefully targeted vulgarities and obscenities,
but not accidentally,
and not just as a part of your normal vocabulary. And so had I not said, go look, that conversation isn't going to happen.
Right. This goes back. I said MTV was just coming out. What I did was I would turn MTV on, sit down with the kids, watch a music video, and then turn it off, and then I'd say, okay, what were they saying? What was that about? What was going on? And today I've got a Spotify account, and I'm a tech user of the sort that figures out how to use 5% of the program to get what I want. And then there are all these features that just lie dormant. And just today, I accidentally found there's a little icon on the bottom of the desktop Spotify. You click it, and the lyrics appear.
Game changer.
You say, oh, that's what he's saying.
This is news to me, so that's very exciting.
It's like it's a little thing on the lower right-hand side, and the lyrics pop up, and it's, man.
Yeah.
And those moments are, you can do so much by exegeting a song or a movie. Like if you sit down with kids.
Tell the story about what you.
Well, yeah. Well, there's a couple stories here. One was like Elsa. So we flamed Elsa. Flamed Elsa.
Yeah. Why did you do that, by the way? Why did you?
Well, I'll tell you why.
Yeah, tell us.
I flamed her back in the day without a flamethrower for my kids. But we'd watch Elsa, and when she's doing the no right, no wrong, no rules for me, I'm free, which is the exact, like, oh, pause. Yeah. And we're like, well, let's do some biblical counseling with Elsa. Right. Yeah. What's the idol of her heart at the moment? Let's replace that with a promise.
Yeah. What was the conduit for the follow your heart crap that flooded into so many evangelical homes? Yeah. Well, it's
Disney.
You can be whatever you want to be when you grow up, kid. Dad, can I be a woman?
You might sort of like you want to say, no rules, no right, no wrong. I'm free, and you want to sort of show him that clip, and then you want to show him like an old Wile E. Coyote, where he runs and he runs off the edge of the cliff, and he's like, okay, so these are the same. This is just the same movie.
Yes, but so you can exegete that. You can exegete song lyrics. So I just did this with some students at Logos. We pulled up a song, and regrettably, it was by One Direction, which I just discovered they seem to be like the Backstreet Boys of the modern day, whatever. They're obviously a big deal. There was a lot of views on YouTube, but I was like, oh boy, and we just worked through it, and especially with music, right? You know, when you read the lyrics, you're like, oh my, because sometimes the soundtrack comports with the lyrics. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's deadly, and this was like one of those songs. So this particular song was kind of just smooth and, you know, disarming, and yet it was about like a girl wearing a dress that her mom didn't like because it showed off everything that her mom didn't have. And I was like, oh, so we're cutting her away from the herd. We're cutting her away from her people, from her generations, right? Yeah. And now you take her out and all this. And it's just and when you do that with the students, eyes just light up. They're like, oh boy. I'm like, they are coming for you. Like you have to always have your guard up and enjoy it, like read it and then go, oh, this is what you're saying. And then put it in terms. Like, I'll just say it real plain. Like, and then that hits. Right.
You have to, and this is a really important point, because what you're going to have to do there is like what you just did is you translated. So here's what the song says, and I'm going to translate. I'm going to put that in more plain speech, right? This is actually what a lot of the satire stuff is doing. Mm-hmm. This is what Ezekiel's doing with the idolatry of Israel. Let me tell you what that idolatry actually is. You
just watched something that you should have found appalling, and you didn't.
You didn't.
And I'm going to translate it, and it's going to be an accurate translation. Yep. And now you're going to find it appalling. And then you're going to attack me.
So in class, like I'm reading it, I was like, so you know what he did is he looked at her and said, you're hotter than your mom. And they were like,
that's creepy.
I'm like, yeah, it's super creepy. And it's what he said. Like, you know, like, let me explain to you.
But I think kids love to be engaged like that.
What the final is in that class?
Okay, so the final of that class, and this has been a long-standing tradition, so it wasn't my idea, but the students will take their top song on Spotify, and then we mix the British literature class, the rhetoric class, and the apologetics and worldview class.
Which is what you're teaching.
Which is what I'm teaching. And they blend all of those together, and they take their top Spotify song, and they have to incorporate what they've learned from all three classes into their exegesis of that song.
That was one of my wife's.
This was your wife's introduction.
Came up with that one where it's like, because what's interesting is you engage kids on literature and they'll just give you the answer that you want.
Right.
You engage them on their playlist and you're touching the apple of their eye. And suddenly like this is what I own. This is my identity. And then you get to the real heart of the matter. So she would say, all right, what's the number one song on your playlist? And yeah, it's not Shakespeare. So we're lowering the tone of class a little bit. Right. We're actually getting to the real heart of the matter. But I think that once you get students to where they see that, they care about it, they love that. They actually like this notion that the next generation has to constantly be turned against their parents. It doesn't have to be that way. Like they can actually like love learning your instincts, your impulses and tastes, and wanting to stand with you. And they're going to be out finding other things that they want to refute now.
Now, of course, I remember junior high. It was junior high. In an English class, we studied some Beatles lyrics. Which here comes the old flat top. He comes grooving up slowly. Unfortunately, the class was just as dumb as the lyrics, so it doesn't always work.
And to bring it sort of into that satire conversation, one of the things my wife has said that she wants our boys to get is when you do the diagnosis and you see the stupid, she wants them to learn to like not just get away, but laugh at it, mock it. Like if the strategy is, hey, here's this enticing thing that's all well packaged and slick and sexy and all this sort of stuff, and you just try to get them to just straight up run away, as opposed to analyzing it, picking it apart, and then what's the proper reaction? If they didn't recognize it, what should they react? It should be appalled, or it should be derision.
Yeah, and the mockery and the laughing has to be by faith, and that's cultivated in the home by the parents. Making the full circle here. That's why you need the flamethrower.
Yeah,
because you're really laughing about it and you're showing the folly of it. And indeed, do you want those fools to come back to Jesus Christ? Absolutely. But your children are actually watching you not be afraid of evil.
Yep.
So we're not scared.
Yep.
All right. But we are going to point it out and name it, and then we're going to laugh. Because those people are going to fall into the pit that they're digging, right? They're digging that pit, and you have to cultivate that and demonstrate. That's a key part of the education.
I remember, it reminded me of a story of when kids were young. Sam was probably 5, and we were at a Chipotle in Minneapolis, and I had seen the trans person. So it was a guy doing poor imitation of being a woman who was serving us at the Chipotle, and he's 5 and doesn't know any better. And we're standing in line as they're making our burrito, and he looks at me and he says, "Dad, is that a boy or a girl?" Just kind of asking the innocent question. And I know that there's an impulse. I could feel the impulse of just kind of embarrassment, like, oh no, he's bringing this up. And but in that moment, the biggest thing I wanted to communicate to him is, you're not the weird one for asking that question, right? Your question is an absolutely normal question. And so I just bent down and said, buddy, that is a really good question. Let's go talk about it over there. So I didn't want to I wasn't trying to make a scene.
You wanted your burrito.
But I wanted the burrito, and I didn't want them to spit in it. I wasn't gonna, him asking the question, there's a way I think that you could respond to that would make it look like you're the one who's embarrassed. You're the one who doesn't want to make the scene. And instead, the thing you want to communicate is steadiness, confidence, joy, and that, yes, kid, you're on the right track for seeing this.
Right.
You got something for us?
Yeah.
It's my mic. So last things, you mentioned one Kindle. The other Kindle is Stephen Wolf's The Case for Christian Nationalism.
Yes.
Absolutely free. And then the last question I had was, going into December, so no quarter is over as of tomorrow.
Right.
Do you have any recommendations, like book recommendations, or if you were to say, if someone was asking, what is the Moscow mood? Is there a book that would capture that? I'm curious what you guys would answer.
I'll speak to that.
And then we can be done.
Yeah, Moscow mood is at Advent. Like, celebrate this. Bless the mess out of your kids, and have a jolly spirit. Right, get you some festive drinks going on. Worship the Lord. Put worship at the center, but then rejoice that the Lord Jesus Christ indeed came to earth. And so, find ways to cultivate that through gift giving. We'll get some friends around here. I'll leave them nameless, I guess, so they get treasure in heaven. But I think it's a great practice. They do a knock, drop, and dash. Okay, and so they get the whole family. They go to the grocery store, buy a bunch of groceries for a family in need in the church, take all their kids with them, knock on the door, drop the groceries, and take off running. So just snow, dark, fun, and the kids. When you incorporate that kind of spirit in the kids, it's gonna be a wonderful thing. So the book recommendation, Doug's book, was it God Rest Ye Merry? Just a great Advent meditation, very short. So after dinner, you can read a portion of it, and then cultivate the songs of Christmas. So Advent songs, Christmas hymns. There's just a ton of them. The Cantus has a bunch of them, but get those and just incorporate that into your family worship.
Yeah, amen. Christmas is the time when the whole evangelical world turns post-millennial. So we should ride it.
Yeah. Okay.
Mariah Carey herself, just crying out about the Lordship of Christ. It's great.
Other books, recommendations?
No, I would echo God Rest You Merry. I think that'd be the one that hits the tone issue. There's multiple issues there, worship and. Yeah.
You got any book recommendations?
That's great.
Okay, I'll throw one. Sorry, it's not canon. I don't think it is. Tilt-A-Whirl. I think
it's Thomas Nelson.
Not Nelson, right? So Notes from a Tilt-A-Whirl by Nate is a great encapsulation of the kind of Chestertonian, Woodhouseian mood that permeates all of the things. And so if you're looking for something, especially, and if you got a teenager, I'd say that's a really good book to give to a teenager that's going to maybe resonate in ways that that other books might not get. So with that, we reached the end of No Quarter November, and we're sad to see it go. But the advantage that we have is that just like Christmas, it will come around again.
But I do look forward with trepidation to what is going to burn next year.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Do you have any teasers there?
If you have any suggestions,
they assign things to me.
That's right.
And I've just drawn the line at helicopters.
You're not burning any helicopters.
Nothing that requires you going off.
Well,
the ground.
if you have any suggestions, you can go ahead and drop those in the comments for the Canon guys. They'll sift through those and come up. Who knows? Maybe they'll come up with something really good. But thank you for joining us all month long. We're grateful for all those who've watched and listened and bought and gotten all the free books. And until we see you again, love Jesus, love your families, and hoist the colors high.